Hello, I'm Harold Munro, editor-in-chief at the Vancouver Sun and Province, and joining me as our legislative reporter this week again, Katie De Rosa, after a busy week. Hi, Katie.
Hi, Harold.
Um,
Yeah,
every,
with throne
yeah,
speech and budget, so it was
the throne speech on Tuesday, budget on Thursday, and as I think many of our readers know, you were locked away in a lockup for most of the day Thursday, going through the budget. You also had Friday. I guess it's hundreds and hundreds of pages. I guess what's your sort of big takeaway from this budget being an election year? We've got an election in October, so you've been through a lot of these
Yeah,
lockups.
obviously the finance minister Katrina Conroy had said that we are. She said it's not the time to cut, and so that's why we're seeing a $7.9 billion deficit, almost double that of last year's budget. The government insisting that it's not going to cut programs. A lot of the increase was actually due to wages, previously negotiated collective agreements where government employees, and including teachers and other unionized workers got a pay bump. So that's a big chunk of the budget, but also, obviously increases in healthcare. There's things that almost needed to go up just to almost stay level in terms of services. But in terms of the programs, a few, I guess, cashback programs for families, such as a $100 over the year BC Hydro credit that families will get, also a 25% increase in the BC family benefit, and also the income threshold will raise so that more families will qualify for that family benefit. A change to the BC homebuyer, first-time homebuyers program. So if you buy a home up to 850,000, the first 500,000 will not be will not have the capital gains tax apply. Previously, it was about 500,000, and can't buy a home for anywhere in the province, I think, for 500,000. However, I think many would argue that it's hard to even find a home for 850,000. Kevin Falcon had suggested a threshold of 1 million. So some difference of opinion, I suppose, on how much of a break you should be giving first-time home buyers. A lot of criticism that there wasn't barely any programs for renters. Sonia Furstenau basically said that the government ignored renters. There was a call from the Greens to raise the threshold to qualify for some of the rental assistance programs, including the SAFER program, which is for seniors, and that was not in the budget. So definitely, didn't make everyone happy. I think no budget makes every group happy, but for the significant deficit, I think perhaps groups were expecting to see, again, increases in disability assistance, increases in supports for renters. And so definitely some disappointment there.
Right. So it also leaves the door open for the government. I guess there are significant contingencies set aside for whatever they decide to spend those on. And this being an election year, where do you think, like, where did you see things missing that you were expecting that you now expect to see the premier roll out on the election trail?
Well, I mean, that was something that was asked of the finance minister. What did you leave out? And because even for this fiscal year, there's $6 billion in contingencies. And when she was specifically asked, for example, about the Olympic Village school, which parents have been asking for, she said, you'll see an announcement in the coming weeks. So there's an example of something that was not specifically named in the budget, I think, because the government and Premier Eby wants to make that announcement in the community. The Premier has made a real effort to, have those press conferences out in the open as opposed to at the legislature. He'll probably have it with some families around, families who live in Olympic Village. Surrey schools, the Surrey School District, the Surrey School Board trustee I spoke to on Friday said that oftentimes the government will make announcements on schools in March. So Surrey, as we know, is 100 or thousands of students in portables, and there's a big need for new schools in Surrey. So likely we'll see those announcements coming. Perhaps they just didn't want them to get buried in the budget along with everything else. So I think some capital projects we will see announced in advance of the election in October.
Even the rebates that you mentioned earlier, there's a deadline on those, right? They're only good for a year, which gets them through the election, but perhaps, again, something they could campaign on and say, if you reelect us, we'll extend that, but at the very least, it's a rather transparent
Yeah.
attempt to curry votes.
Yeah, I mean, our colleague Lori, she wrote a great story with several different families reacting, and they said we're happy to see the increase in the 25% increase in the BC family benefit, but it's only for 1 year. I mean, costs are not going down, so why have it at this limited time frame? And especially if parents feel like they're getting a benefit, to then drop down to a lower amount in previous next years, that's a hit. That's money that you start to rely on. So definitely some questions about why these programs are only for 1 year.
Hmm. So you mentioned where you can see directionally the NDP going with this budget in terms of their campaign this fall. Where are the openings potentially for the opposition? You mentioned Sonia Furstenau around renters and seniors. What about for Kevin Falcon and BC United, or John Rustad and the Conservatives? Where do you think they're going to go after this budget?
I mean, Kevin Falcon and John Rustad both said that this is reckless spending. John Rustad said that the premier is going to bankrupt the future British Columbians who will have to pay off this debt. Kevin Falcon, who's a former finance minister, said this is the worst example of reckless spending he's ever seen. So, they're saying that there should be some, fiscal belt tightening. And, Falcon has basically said, he was asked, well, where would you cut? And he basically said that he would find more efficiencies. He said that the government is not efficient in the way it delivers programs. So his criticism is that they make all these announcements, higher wages for doctors, new urgent primary care centers that end up being understaffed. So he's basically saying the outcomes are not matching the investments. And so, he said that the government on their housing programs should, basically give the leg up to private developers and then get out of the way. We hear that from Kevin Falcon a lot, is government needs to get out of the way because it ends up making things more expensive. So whether or not that's accurate, or I can't confirm, but that's definitely something that he has said. And Premier Eby has fought back, saying, again, attacking the BC Liberals, the former BC Liberal government, for 16 years of getting out of the way. And he said that allowed speculators to run rampant. And today, Premier Eby was in Vancouver talking about the flipping tax. So that's another angle aspect of the budget, is a new tax on anyone who buys and sells a home within 2 years. The tax is highest if you sell a home within 1 year, where you'll get a 20% tax, and then that tax rate declines as you get closer to the 2-year mark. So there are exemptions for people who've had a divorce or death in the family, job loss, so unexpected circumstances that force them to sell a house. But other than that, he basically says that he doesn't want anyone to flip homes, and he hopes that the tax revenue is zero.
Right. Okay. Well, so even even David Eby will talk about the need for the private sector to be a major player if we're going to get to the point of having enough housing to meet the need. This budget does project there's some concerning numbers in there in terms of housing starts, right? It doesn't necessarily look like we're going to get the kind of investment, or they're expecting the kind of investment from the private sector in housing, at least over the short term. What does that mean? Because that's going to be a big issue going into the election.
I definitely think, again, that the NDP is going to try and tout the policies on the Housing Supply Act, which will promote municipalities to approve more housing. They'll tout the missing middle, the legislation to increase density in single family neighborhoods and density around housing or transit hubs. But again, those are just policies. We need to see those in action. And so there's skepticism, I suppose, around the numbers that the government has been saying that these policies will create, the number of new housing starts that will be created, because again, the private industry has to build these apartment towers near transit hubs and these sixplexes in residential neighborhoods. And I guess what the development community is saying is that if there continues to be this kind of red tape in building a sixplex in a single family neighborhood, even though the legislation says it can happen, there might be other ways that municipalities could slow down the process depending on where you are, then that will be a deterrent. Again, the budget also did have some tax breaks for the development of rental buildings, and so perhaps that could spur construction. But I think what the development community is saying is that development cost charges are going up, and with interest rates being so high,
Yes.
those are
Yeah.
factors that the government doesn't really control, that are deterring builders from building more housing.
Right. And if this wave of new housing does come, we've been hearing a lot, and you've written about this, from the mayors and councillors who are concerned about the lack of infrastructure investment to support any of this new upzoning. We heard that again after the budget. Municipalities concerned, some mayors concerned about that. And the premier, at least one of the responses in our story was, well, the federal government needs to step up. So he seems to be pushing responsibility off to the federal government.
Yes, again, on infrastructure, a big theme is basically saying the federal government has left this behind, and we need them to step in, because again, like you said, the mayors have been saying, where is the infrastructure funding to just make sure that these new homes that are built, that the toilets flush and that the sewage system can keep up. So really a definite concern from mayors about lack of transit funding and lack of infrastructure funding to support these growing communities. And so, obviously the federal budget is coming out, so maybe there'll be a big announcement there. Certainly that's something that the premier is pressuring, and all premiers, of course, are asking for the same thing. So it's also coming up to a federal election. So I'm sure Trudeau will want to be making the municipalities happy, but there's a lot of them across Canada, so it's hard to spread that federal cash the way BC wants it.
Takes a lot of money. All right. Okay, Katie. Well, good luck in the legislature this week, and we'll talk again next Monday.
Thanks, Harold. Take care.